Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift back in time, far, far away from your perfectly climate-controlled bedroom, back to a world where staying warm wasn't just a luxury, it was the entire plot of the movie. Imagine a biting winter wind howling outside a small, drafty dwelling. You're huddled inside, maybe wrapped in rough animal hides, and the ground beneath you is radiating a bone-chilling cold that seems to seep right into your soul. Your fingers feel like tiny ice cubes, your nose is probably running, and honestly, you're just trying to make it through the night without turning into a human popsicle. It's a stark reality, a far cry from just flicking a switch or snuggling under a heated blanket. You probably wouldn't survive a single winter night back then without some serious ingenuity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're up for it, drop your location and what time it is for you in the comments. It's always wild to see where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins not with grand palaces or complex machinery, but with the most basic human need, warmth in the face of cold. Think about it. Since the dawn of time, humans have gathered around fires. The crackling flames, the dancing light, the glorious heat that pushed back the darkness and the chill, it was the heart of survival. But even with a roaring fire in the center of a cave or a hut, the ground stayed stubbornly cold. That damp, earthy floor was a constant reminder of the biting temperatures outside, a thermal sink that stole warmth from your feet and made sleep a shivering ordeal. Early humans were clever, though. They observed. They experimented. They noticed that the stones around the fire got warm. They noticed that the ground directly under the fire got warm, even if it was just a little bit. This wasn't some grand engineering project yet, it was just noticing. Noticing that heat radiates, that it spreads, that it can linger in solid things like earth and stone long after the flames die down. The absolute earliest traces of humans intentionally trying to manage heat, beyond just having an open fire, are incredibly ancient. We're talking hundreds of thousands of years ago. Archaeological sites in places like Europe and Africa have unearthed evidence of early hominids creating structured hearths, not just random bonfires. These weren't always for floor heating, mind you. They were for cooking, for protection, for light. But the principle was there, controlling fire, containing it, using it deliberately. And inevitably, the ground around and under these early hearths would warm up. Imagine a small group huddled together, the fire blazing, and someone, perhaps accidentally, stretches out a leg onto the earth near the coals. Ah, a discovery. A small pocket of warmth on an otherwise freezing surface. Now, pinpointing the absolute moment someone thought, "Hey, let's heat the entire floor," is where historians still argue whether it was a single eureka moment, or a very slow, gradual evolution. Was it a genius inventor, or just centuries of people trying slightly different things with fire and noticing what happened? We don't have a patent application from 30,000 BC, sadly. But we do have archaeology. And the archaeological record suggests that the idea of using the ground itself as a thermal mass, a kind of natural battery for heat, started to take shape in different cultures independently, often out of sheer necessity in cold climates. Fast forward many thousands of years, and you start seeing more deliberate attempts. Picture simple pit houses, semi-underground dwellings dug into the earth. These offered some insulation from the wind and cold, but the floor was still the cold, cold ground. If you built a fire inside, the smoke had to go somewhere, usually just out a hole in the roof. Smoky, drafty, but better than nothing. However, if you built your fire near the entrance or in a separate, shallow pit, and then covered it over slightly, you might notice that the ground around it held onto the warmth longer. You could lie down near that spot and feel the heat radiating up. It was crude, inefficient, and probably involved a lot of coughing from smoke, but it was a step. The basic concept is almost laughably simple when you break it down. Fire makes heat. Heat makes things warm. If you make the floor warm, the room gets warm. Revolutionary, right? Like discovering water is wet. But the devil, as always, is in the details. How do you do it safely? How do you do it efficiently? How do you do it without filling your entire living space with choking smoke? These were the puzzles that early peoples grappled with, and the answers they found, particularly in Northeast Asia, would eventually lead to one of the most ingenious and enduring heating systems ever devised, Ondol. Think about your own home right now. You probably have radiators, or forced air vents, or underfloor heating pipes carrying hot water or electric wires. Modern solutions. Now strip all that away. No copper pipes, no thermostats, no power grid. Just earth, stone, fire, and smoke. That's the toolkit our ancestors had. Their first attempts at heating the ground were intrinsically linked to the hearth, the source of fire. The heat from the flames didn't just go up, it went out and down. And if you placed thermal mass, rocks, earth, near that heat source, it would absorb that energy. Imagine a very early dwelling, maybe just a shallow pit with a roof of branches and mud. Inside, a small fire burns. The people huddle around it. The air near the fire is warm, but the edges of the dwelling, especially the floor, are frigid. Now, imagine someone piles some rocks around the fire pit. They notice the rocks get hot and stay warm for a while after the fire dies down. Then, maybe they start placing flat stones on the heated earth near the fire pit. They lie on these stones. Bliss. A patch of warmth. This wasn't a full Ondol system, not by a long shot, but it was the seed of the idea, using the ground itself to store and radiate heat. It was about capturing that precious energy that normally just drifted away as smoke and hot air. It was about realizing that the floor, that cold, neglected surface, could be transformed into the warmest, coziest part of the home. The journey from a simple campfire to a sophisticated, integrated floor heating system would take millennia, spanning continents and cultures, but the fundamental insight, that heat can be harnessed and directed to warm the ground you walk and sleep on, began in those early, smoky shelters, born out of the simple, desperate need to survive the cold. It was the hearth's first whisper of a promise, that even the coldest earth could be made warm. That fundamental insight, that heat can be harnessed and directed to warm the ground you walk and sleep on, began in those early, smoky shelters, born out of the simple, desperate need to survive the cold. It was the hearth's first whisper of a promise, that even the coldest earth could be made warm. Now let's dig a little deeper, literally, into those early structures where this idea really started to take root. We're talking about pit houses. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of a shallow depression in the ground, maybe just a few feet deep. The walls are the packed earth, maybe reinforced with some branches or logs. A simple roof of thatch or hides covers the top, with a hole in the middle for smoke. This is your home, your cozy pit house. These kinds of dwellings were common in many parts of the world, especially in colder climates, because digging into the earth provided a bit of natural insulation. The ground temperature below the surface is more stable than the air temperature above, so it would feel warmer in winter and cooler in summer compared to a surface-level hut. But the floor was still the earth itself, cold, damp, and definitely not inviting for a nap. So, where did the fire go? Usually, it was an open hearth, right there in the middle or off to one side. The smoke, as mentioned, went out the hole in the roof, hopefully. But you'd still get a lot of smoke swirling around inside. Think of trying to relax and drift off to sleep while essentially hotboxing yourself with burning wood fumes. Not exactly the ASMR experience we're aiming for tonight. The crucial development, the one that points towards floor heating, was when people started experimenting with the fire's location and how to manage the smoke. Instead of just a simple open pit in the center, they might build the fire closer to one wall, or even slightly outside the main living space, perhaps in a small annex or a carefully constructed pit adjacent to the main room. Why do this? Well, partly for safety, less risk of the roof catching fire, and partly to try and direct the smoke away from the main sleeping area. But a happy accident, or maybe an intended consequence, of this was that the ground between the fire source and the smoke exit started to get warm. Imagine the fire pit is in a corner. You build a low wall or a mound of earth, creating a shallow channel leading from the fire pit towards another opening, maybe on the opposite side of the pit house. You light the fire. The smoke and hot gases follow this channel. you cover the channel with flat stones or packed earth. Now, the fire isn't directly under you, but the heat from the smoke and hot air is flowing beneath a section of your floor before exiting. That section of the floor starts to warm up. It's like giving the heat a little underground detour before it escapes into the sky. This wasn't sophisticated engineering yet. We're talking about people figuring things out by trial and error, noticing that if you dug a trench and covered it, the hot air moving through it heated the ground above. It was probably inefficient, leaky, and still pretty smoky, but it was a significant leap. You could now have a fire burning elsewhere, and a section of your floor would get warm enough to lie on comfortably, warm enough to dry things, warm enough to make that cold, damp pit house feel a little less like a refrigerated cave. This basic idea of a channel for hot smoke under the floor is the absolute core principle that would evolve into Ondol. It's like the caveman version of underfloor heating, minus the thermostat, and plus a significant risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. Oops, maybe not that cozy yet. Historians still argue whether these early, rudimentary systems were truly intentional, floor heating, or just efforts to manage smoke and fire location that happened to result in some floor warming. It's hard to know the exact thought process of someone 10,000 years ago, you know? Did they wake up one morning and think, "Eureka! I shall route the smoke under my sleeping mat"? Or did they just notice that the ground near the smoky trench was surprisingly nice and toasty? We lack the ancient equivalent of a "my first invention" diary entries, sadly. But regardless of the precise intention, the effect was the same. The ground was becoming a thermal battery. The earth and stones absorbed the heat from the passing smoke and hot air, holding onto it long after the fire died down. This meant warmth wasn't just available when the fire was roaring, it lingered, providing comfort through the night. It was a game changer for survival in harsh winters. Imagine the relief of being able to stretch out on a warm patch of floor instead of shivering directly on the frozen earth. It fundamentally altered the dwelling from just a shelter from the wind and rain to a place that could actively push back the cold. These early pit house systems, sometimes called hypocausts in a broader sense, though the Roman version was much more advanced and typically used hot air, not smoke, and often heated walls or elevated floors, show up in archaeological records across various cold regions in Eurasia. This quirky tidbit is that similar concepts, like heating stones in a pit and then covering them to radiate heat, or even primitive smoke channels, seem to have appeared independently in different cultures facing similar problems. It wasn't just a Korean thing initially. The need for warmth sparked innovation in many places. However, it was in the Korean peninsula and surrounding regions that this specific idea of channeling smoke under a living floor would be developed and refined into the sophisticated system we now know as Ondol. These were tough times, right? No central heating, no down blankets, just your wits and whatever materials you could scrounge up. Getting this rudimentary floor heating to work probably involved a lot of trial and error, a lot of smoky failures, and maybe a few singed eyebrows. Seriously, imagine trying to explain the concept of draft and flue gas velocity to someone whose main engineering tool is a sharp rock. But with each attempt they learned. They learned how to make the channels longer, how to create a better draft to pull the smoke through, how to lay the stones more effectively to absorb and radiate heat. The pit house, with its smoky, rudimentary floor channels, was the cradle where the core concept of Ondol was born. It wasn't cozy yet, not by modern standards, but it was warm, and in a world where winter was a constant threat, warm was everything. So, you've got the basic idea now. Fire here, smoke goes under the floor through a trench, floor gets warm. Simple, right? But as people moved out of the most basic pit houses and started building more structured dwellings, think more substantial walls, roofs that didn't leak quite as much, maybe even separate areas for sleeping and cooking, the heating system had to evolve too. You couldn't just have a smoky trench running through the middle of your increasingly sophisticated home. This is where the early kingdoms come in, particularly the kingdom of Goguryeo. Imagine the landscape in Northeast Asia during the time of Goguryeo, roughly stretching from the 1st century BC to the 7th century CE. This wasn't exactly the Bahamas. We're talking cold, harsh winters, the kind that make your teeth ache just thinking about them. Surviving required serious smarts, and the people of Goguryeo were definitely smart when it came to staying warm. As their settlements grew into cities and their dwellings became more complex, moving from semi-subterranean pits to more surface-level buildings with raised floors and timber structures, they needed a heating solution that could scale up and integrate better with more advanced architecture. The key innovation wasn't inventing floor heating from scratch. Remember, the basic concept was already rattling around. The genius of Goguryeo, and the cultures they interacted with, was in refining that concept into a robust, repeatable system. They took the smoky trench idea and turned it into something much more organized, much more efficient, and critically, much less likely to fill your house with carbon monoxide while you slept. It was like upgrading from a muddy ditch to a proper, albeit stone-lined, ductwork system. The first big step was separating the fire source from the main living space. Instead of an open hearth in the middle of the room or a pit just outside, they developed a dedicated firebox, typically located in the kitchen area or an adjacent room. This firebox, called the agumai in later Korean terminology, was the heart of the system. It was where the fuel was burned, and it was designed to direct the hot gases and smoke into the floor structure, not just let them billow randomly into the air. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of your furnace, a specific appliance for generating heat. From the agumai, a network of channels or flues was constructed under the floor of the main living room. These channels, known as gori, were carefully laid out using stone and earth. They weren't just random trenches. They were designed to distribute the heat evenly across the floor surface. The hot smoke and air would travel from the firebox, through these channels, and then exit through a chimney, usually located on the opposite side of the room or dwelling. This created a draft. The hot air rising up the chimney pulled the smoke and heat through the gori channels, ensuring a constant flow. Over these gori channels, flat stones, called gudol, were carefully laid. These stones formed the actual floor surface of the heated room. They weren't just any old rocks. They were selected for their ability to absorb and retain heat. The smoke and hot gases flowed directly beneath these stones, heating them up. The stones then radiated that heat upwards into the room, warming the air and, more importantly, warming the floor itself. This stone layer was then typically covered with layers of clay and paper, creating a smooth, durable, and thermally mass-rich floor surface. This structured approach was a huge leap. By having a dedicated firebox, planned channels, and a chimney for exit, they gained much better control over the heat and smoke. The smoke was largely kept out of the living area, reducing the risk of suffocation and making the air inside much cleaner. The heat was directed specifically under the floor, maximizing its effectiveness for warming the living space. And the stone layer acted as a thermal battery, storing heat from the fire and releasing it slowly over many hours, long after the flames had died down. You could fire it up in the evening, and the floor would stay warm throughout the night, a true luxury in a freezing climate. Mainstream historical fact check: the Kingdom of Goguryeo was one of the 3 kingdoms of Korea, along with Beech and Silla, and controlled a vast territory in Manchuria and the northern Korean peninsula for over 700 years, facing off against powerful neighbors like the Sui and Tang dynasties of China. Their military prowess is well known, but their architectural and engineering achievements, including these early sophisticated heating systems, are equally impressive and speak to a highly developed society. Now for a quirky tidbit. Archaeological excavations of Goguryeo sites have revealed a surprising variety in the layout and construction of these early gori channels. They weren't always a perfectly standardized grid. Sometimes they were more like branching paths, sometimes wider, sometimes narrower, depending on the size and shape of the room, and likely, the skill and resources of the builders. It wasn't like they had a blueprint from Home Depot. It was still a system that was being iterated upon and adapted locally. This variability is part of why historians still argue whether these specific Goguryeo systems were the direct, sole ancestors of the later, more standardized Joseon-era Ondol, or if they represent a parallel development, or one of several regional influences that fed into the later form. The precise lines of transmission and innovation are still a subject of scholarly debate. Think about the engineering challenge here. You're dealing with fire, hot gases, heavy stones, and potentially toxic smoke, all without modern tools or materials. Getting the draft right was crucial. If the chimney wasn't tall enough, or the channels were too narrow or blocked, the smoke wouldn't pull through properly, and you'd end up with a smoky, inefficient mess. If the stones weren't laid correctly, they could crack or shift, leading to structural problems or smoke leaks. It was a delicate balance of physics and craftsmanship. Imagine trying to explain fluid dynamics and heat transfer to someone whose primary qualification is being really good at stacking rocks. Okay, so the hot stuff goes this way, but only if the cold stuff outside is pulling it that way. Simple. Not really. This wasn't just about adding a bit of warmth. It fundamentally changed how people lived indoors. The floor became the primary living surface. Instead of sitting on elevated furniture or shivering on the cold ground, you could sit, eat, work, and sleep directly on the warm floor. This had profound implications for domestic architecture and social customs, something we'll delve into more later. But for the people of Goguryeo, especially during those brutal northern winters, it meant the difference between enduring the cold and actually living comfortably. It was a system born of necessity, but refined with ingenuity, laying the groundwork for the cozy revolution that would sweep the Korean peninsula. It was proof that even with relatively simple materials, sophisticated engineering was possible, transforming the humble dwelling into a warm, inviting haven. So, you've got Goguryeo figuring out the sophisticated flue system, separating the firebox, channeling smoke under the floor, and getting it out a chimney. This wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was a technology that proved incredibly effective in the harsh northern climate. And like any good idea, it didn't stay confined to one kingdom forever. As political landscapes shifted and new powers rose, this warming wisdom started to spread. After the fall of Goguryeo in the 7th century, a new kingdom emerged in much of its former northern territory, Balhae. This was a vast and powerful state, often called the prosperous country in the east, by its neighbors. Balhae inherited many cultural and technological aspects from Goguryeo, and it's highly likely that the refined floor heating system was one of them. Imagine the engineers and builders from the Old Kingdom, now working for the new rulers, bringing their knowledge of how to build those intricate gory channels and lay those heat-absorbing Gödel stones. Balhae's territory stretched across parts of what is now northeastern China, North Korea, and even into Russia's Far East. Surviving winters in that region without robust heating? Forget about it. So, the need was definitely there, and the technology was available. Archaeological evidence from Balhae sites, like the ruins of their capital Sangyeong, does show structures consistent with Ondol systems, indicating that they not only adopted but likely continued to develop this technology. This spread wasn't just about geography, it was about cultural exchange. Balhae had extensive interactions with neighboring states, including the Tang dynasty in China and various Jurchen and Mo tribes. While these other cultures had their own heating methods, like the Kong, a heated brick bed platform in northern China, which shares some principles but is distinct from Ondol's entire floor heating, the sophisticated, integrated Ondol system of Balhae would have been a notable technology. Historians still argue whether the Balhae system was a direct continuation of Goguryeo's, or if it incorporated new ideas or adaptations from other regional heating methods, creating a unique Balhae version. It's a tangled web of ancient engineering patents that we can only trace through stones and soot. Now, let's move south on the peninsula. While Goguryeo and Balhae were mastering northern heating, the southern kingdoms, particularly Silla, were also developing. Silla eventually unified the peninsula in the late 7th century, creating unified Silla. While unified Silla had its own innovations, the full-floor Ondol system seems to have remained more prevalent and developed in the northern regions that had been under Goguryeo and Balhae influence. It wasn't until the Goryeo dynasty, which succeeded unified Silla in the 10th century, that Ondol technology truly began to permeate the entire Korean peninsula and become the dominant heating method. Goryeo was a period of significant cultural flourishing and consolidation. The capital was Kaesong, in modern-day North Korea, a region with distinct seasons, including cold winters, though perhaps not as brutally harsh as Balhae's northern reaches. During the Goryeo era, Ondol transitioned from being primarily a northern or elite feature to becoming a more common part of domestic architecture across various social strata. It wasn't just for palaces or important buildings anymore. Ordinary homes started incorporating the system, albeit perhaps in simpler forms or only in certain rooms. Imagine a Goryeo-era home. You'd likely have a raised wooden floor in some areas, perhaps for ventilation and protection from the damp earth. But in the main living and sleeping area, the Ondolbang, the Ondol room, you'd have that specially constructed floor. The Agumai firebox would often be integrated into the kitchen stove, making efficient use of fuel. You could cook your meal and heat your room simultaneously. Talk about multitasking. The hot smoke from the cooking fire would be directed under the adjacent room's floor before exiting via a chimney. This integration with the kitchen stove became a hallmark of the Korean Ondol system for centuries, a practical stroke of genius that maximized heat utility from every precious piece of firewood. The Goryeo period saw further refinement of the system. Builders got better at constructing the Goryeo channels to ensure a more even distribution of heat. They learned how to lay the Goodall stones more effectively to prevent smoke leaks and maximize heat retention. They also experimented with the materials used for the floor surface above the stones, often using layers of clay and paper soaked in oil, which created a durable, smooth surface that was easy to clean and help seal in the heat, and seal out the smoke. A quirky tidbit is that the quality and thickness of the Goodall stones were crucial. Too thin, and they wouldn't retain heat. Too thick, and they wouldn't heat up properly. Finding the right balance was a matter of experience and local stone availability. Imagine being the ancient equivalent of a floor tile salesman, but you're selling rocks based on their specific thermal properties. Yes, these granite slabs from the mountains are excellent for heat retention, sir, though they take a while to warm up. Perhaps these schist stones for a quicker heat? The spread of Ondol during Goryeo wasn't just about comfort, it had significant social implications. With a warm floor, the way people used their homes changed. The floor became the center of domestic life. Families would gather on the warm surface to eat, talk, and sleep. It fostered a culture of sitting and sleeping directly on the floor, which in turn influenced furniture design, or lack thereof. Low tables and floor cushions became common, and social interactions. It literally laid the foundation for a different way of living compared to cultures that relied on elevated furniture and chairs. A mainstream historical fact about Goryeo is its significant cultural achievements, including the invention of the world's first movable metal-type printing press in the 13th century, predating Gutenberg by over 200 years, and the exquisite Goryeo Celadon pottery. That a society capable of such advanced metallurgy and ceramics was also refining a sophisticated floor heating system isn't surprising. It speaks to a high level of technical skill and innovation across various fields. The refinement during Goryeo wasn't necessarily about radical invention, but about optimization and broader adoption. Think of it like the evolution of a car engine. The basic principle stays the same, combustion creating power, but over time, engineers make it more efficient, more reliable, and easier to mass produce. Goryeo builders were doing the same with Ondol, making it work better, last longer, and be accessible to more people. It was a slow, steady process of trial and error, passed down through generations of builders and homeowners. You can almost hear the ancient equivalent of a contractor saying, "Yeah, we tried that layout last winter, too much smoke backflow. This time, we'll make the chimney a bit taller and angle the last channel slightly differently." By the end of the Goryeo period and heading into the Joseon dynasty, Ondol was firmly established as the quintessential Korean heating system. It had evolved from a rudimentary, smoky trench in a pit house to a sophisticated, integrated architectural feature capable of warming entire rooms efficiently and relatively safely, compared to earlier versions, anyway. Remember that carbon monoxide risk is still hanging around. It was a technology perfectly suited to the climate and the lifestyle, and its widespread adoption in Goryeo set the stage for its golden age in the subsequent Joseon era. It was proof that a simple idea, nurtured and refined over centuries, could transform the fundamental experience of living through winter, making the cold earth beneath your feet not a source of dread, but of enduring, comforting warmth. So, Goryeo really hammered out the kinks, making Ondol a practical, integrated heating system that started spreading across the peninsula. But if Goryeo was the era of refinement and wider adoption, then the Joseon dynasty, which ruled Korea for over 500 years from the late 14th century, was truly the golden age of Ondol. This was when the system became not just a common feature, but an absolutely fundamental, non-negotiable element of Korean architecture and daily life, from the humblest farmer's cottage to the grandest royal palace. Imagine stepping into a Joseon-era home. The first thing you'd likely notice, especially in winter, wasn't the fancy furniture, there wasn't much, or the intricate decorations. It was the floor. It was warm. Not just lukewarm, but genuinely, deeply, soul-satisfyingly warm. This wasn't an accident. It was the result of centuries of accumulated knowledge and refinement. The Joseon period saw Ondol reach its peak in terms of design, efficiency, and integration into the traditional Korean house, the hanok. The hanok itself was designed in harmony with Ondol. The layout, the placement of rooms, even the materials used were all influenced by the need to efficiently heat the floors. The kitchen, containing the crucial Agumai firebox, was strategically located next to the main living and sleeping rooms, the Ondolbang. This wasn't just for convenience. It was a brilliant piece of passive energy management. The heat generated by cooking the family's meals would be immediately channeled under the adjacent floor, providing warmth without requiring a separate fire just for heating during the day. It was like getting two for the price of one: dinner and a cozy floor. Talk about efficiency. Your modern smart home thermostat has nothing on this ancient multitasking stove. The construction of the Ondol system within the hanok became highly standardized, a testament to its widespread adoption and proven effectiveness. The Agumai fireplace, usually located in the kitchen or a service area, was carefully constructed to draw air and direct the hot gases and smoke into the underfloor channels. These channels, the gori, were meticulously laid out beneath the main rooms using stones or packed earth walls. They typically followed a pattern that ensured the hot gases flowed from the Agumai side across the entire floor area before converging towards the chimney, *chimney*, on the opposite side. Above the gori channels lay the heart of the system, the Gudel stones. These flat stones, often granite or other dense, heat-retentive rocks, were laid directly over the channels, forming a solid, continuous layer. The thickness and type of stone were important. They needed to absorb heat quickly but release it slowly over many hours. This stone layer was then covered with several layers of clay, often mixed with ash or other materials for insulation and smoothness, and finally finished with thick, oiled paper, *hanji*. This paper floor was surprisingly durable and easy to clean, and it created a seamless, airtight surface that prevented smoke from leaking into the room while allowing the radiant heat from the stones to permeate upwards. This integrated design meant that the Ondol wasn't just a heating system tacked onto a house. It was part of the house's very structure and identity. The warm floor wasn't just a place to stand. It was the primary living area. Families would spend most of their time sitting or lying directly on the heated floor. Meals were served on low tables, social gatherings happened on cushions spread across the warm surface, and at night, thick quilts, **, were laid out directly on the floor for sleeping. This had profound social and cultural consequences. The warm floor fostered a sense of togetherness and intimacy. Everyone gathered in the warmest spot, sharing the heat. It influenced Korean etiquette and social customs, leading to the practice of removing shoes indoors to keep the warm, clean floor clean, and the development of floor-based furniture and activities. Imagine trying to have a formal tea ceremony while your feet are freezing. Not ideal. The warm floor made floor-based living not just tolerable, but incredibly comfortable and inviting. A mainstream historical fact about the Joseon dynasty is its strong adherence to Neo-Confucianism, which deeply influenced social structure, governance, and daily life. While not directly related to engineering, this emphasis on order, hierarchy, and family values indirectly shaped how domestic spaces, including the Ondolbang, were used and organized, often centering around the warm floor as the heart of the family unit. Now for a quirky tidbit. While the general principles were standardized, regional variations in Ondol construction persisted throughout the Joseon period. For example, in areas with abundant specific types of stone, those were favored for the Gudul. In areas where wood was scarce but clay was plentiful, the Gori channels might be built more extensively with clay walls. Some regions even developed unique agungai designs or chimney placements. It wasn't a single, rigid blueprint, but a system adapted to local resources and builder ingenuity. Historians still argue whether certain regional variations offered significant advantages in terms of efficiency or durability, or if they were simply a result of local tradition and available materials. Getting the Ondol system right was a skilled craft, passed down through generations of builders. It wasn't just about digging holes and laying stones. It required an understanding of draft, heat transfer, and material properties. Laying the Gudul stones correctly was particularly crucial. They had to be level, stable, and closely fitted to prevent smoke leaks. The clay layer above them needed to be thick enough for insulation and heat storage, but not so thick that it took forever to warm up. And the paper finish had to be applied just right to create that smooth, sealed surface. It was a complex interplay of elements, and a poorly built Ondol could be inefficient, smoky, or even dangerous. Yes, carbon monoxide poisoning was a real risk if the system wasn't properly sealed and vented. Cozy, but occasionally deadly cozy. The daily ritual of firing the Ondol was integral to Joseon life. In the evening, the agungai would be stoked, usually with firewood or other biomass. The hot gases would flow through the gori, heating the Gudul stones. The fire would burn down, but the stones would retain the heat, slowly radiating it upwards throughout the night and into the morning. This residual heat was often enough to keep the room comfortable until the next evening's firing. It was a rhythm dictated by the system, gathering fuel, stoking the fire, enjoying the warmth, and letting the stored heat carry you through. Imagine having to manage your home heating like tending a slow cooker, constantly monitoring the fuel and the temperature, hoping it lasts the night. The Joseon period represented the culmination of millennia of development. The rudimentary pit house trench had evolved into a sophisticated, integrated architectural system that defined the Korean home. Ondol wasn't just a way to stay warm. It was a way of life, deeply embedded in the culture, architecture, and social fabric of the nation. It provided unparalleled comfort in a cold climate using readily available natural materials and a simple, brilliant principle. It was a testament to human ingenuity, turning the cold earth from an adversary into a source of enduring warmth. So, you've got this incredibly sophisticated system by the Joseon era, the agungai, the gori, the Gudul, the Yeon chimney, all integrated into the hanok. But how does it actually work? What's the magic happening under your feet that turns cold stone into a radiator? It boils down to some really simple, elegant physics, the kind that makes you nod and say, "Oh, right, that makes sense," after millennia of trial and error. Imagine you're standing in the kitchen, right next to the agungai. This is where the fire is, the beating heart of the Ondol system. You feed it fuel, wood, brushwood, agricultural waste, whatever's available. The fire roars, producing heat and a lot of hot smoke and gases. Now, instead of just letting this go up a chimney immediately, the agungai is designed to funnel these hot gases horizontally, into the network of gori channels running under the adjacent room's floor. Here's where the physics comes in. Hot air, or in this case, hot smoke and gases, is less dense than cold air. It naturally wants to rise. But the Ondol system uses a clever trick, draft. The chimney, Yeon chimney on the opposite side of the room is usually taller than the agungai opening and exposed to the colder outside air. This difference in height and temperature creates a negative pressure, effectively pulling the hot gases from the agungai through the gori channels towards the chimney. It's like a natural vacuum cleaner, but for smoke and heat. Without that draft, the smoke would just sit there, or worse, leak back into the room. Getting the height and width of the chimney just right relative to the agungai and the gori layout was crucial for creating a good draft, a skill that ancient builders perfected through generations. So, the hot gases are pulled through the gori, flowing like a fiery river beneath the Gudul stones. These stones are key. They are excellent thermal mass. Think of thermal mass like a sponge for heat. When the hot gases flow beneath them, the stones absorb that heat energy. This is primarily through convection, the heat transfer from the moving hot gas to the stone's surface, and radiation, the heat radiating from the hot gas and channel walls to the stones. The stones soak up this heat, getting warmer and warmer. Once the stones are hot, they become radiators. They release the absorbed heat upwards into the room above. This happens through radiation, the stones directly emitting infrared energy, and convection, warming the air that touches their surface. This is what makes the floor feel warm to the touch. The heat then slowly rises, warming the air in the room. But unlike modern forced air systems that just blow hot air around, Ondol provides radiant heat directly from the floor. This is a much more comfortable kind of warmth. It heats objects and people directly, rather than just the air. It feels deeply penetrating and even, like standing in a patch of sunlight, but indoors and reliable. The journey of the hot gases isn't instantaneous. They travel through the maze of gory channels, gradually losing heat to the Goodall stones above and the earth and channel walls around them. By the time the gases reach the chimney on the other side, they've cooled down significantly. The chimney then carries the remaining smoke and cooled gases safely out of the dwelling. The layout of the gory was designed to maximize the contact time between the hot gases and the Goodall stones, ensuring as much heat as possible was transferred to the floor before the gases escaped. Imagine trying to get every last bit of warmth out of your campfire smoke before it disappears. That's what they were doing, but with engineering. The layers above the Goodall stones, the clay, ash mixtures, and oiled paper, played important roles too. The clay and ash layers added more thermal mass and helped distribute the heat evenly across the surface. They also provided insulation, preventing the heat from escaping downwards into the earth and directing it upwards into the room. The final layer of oiled paper created a smooth, durable, and most importantly, airtight seal. This was critical for keeping the smoke and potentially deadly carbon monoxide from leaking into the living space. A tiny crack in that paper, a poorly sealed joint in the clay, and you could have a serious problem. It was a constant maintenance task to ensure the floor remained sealed. So, the cycle is, fire in the ingenuity creates hot gases. Draft pulls gases through gory channels under the floor. Goodall stones absorb heat from the gases. Stones radiate heat upwards into the room. Cooled gases exit through the chimney. Simple, right? But the brilliance is in the system's passive nature and efficiency. Once the stones are hot, they continue releasing heat for many hours without needing a continuous fire. This stored heat meant comfort throughout the night, even after the fire in the ingenuity had died down. A mainstream historical fact, the principle of using thermal mass to store and radiate heat has been employed in various forms throughout history, but the Ondol system is particularly notable for its integration into the entire floor of the living space and its use of hot smoke/gases directly from a firebox/stove for heating, making it distinct from Roman hypocausts which typically used hot air and heated elevated floors or walls. Now for a quirky tidbit, the layout of the gory channels wasn't always just a simple grid. Some systems used a herringbone pattern, others a branching pattern, and some even incorporated wider sections or baffles designed to slow down the flow of hot gases in certain areas, ensuring more even heating across the floor surface. Builders would experiment with these layouts to optimize heat distribution, sometimes even leaving certain areas of the floor intentionally cooler, perhaps for storing food or just as a cooler spot to retreat to. Historians still argue whether the specific patterns of gory channels seen in different historical periods or regions were purely functional optimizations for heat transfer and draft, or if they sometimes incorporated symbolic or aesthetic considerations as well. Were certain layouts considered more auspicious, or did they just happen to work better with the local stone and building techniques? It's a puzzle etched in stone and soot. Imagine the skill involved in building this. You're essentially building a horizontal chimney under a floor that people will live on. The channels have to slope slightly upwards towards the chimney to aid the draft. The Goodall stones have to be perfectly level and tightly fitted. The layers of clay and paper have to be applied meticulously to prevent leaks. One mistake, one loose stone, one crack in the clay, and you could have smoke billowing into your bedroom. It required a deep understanding of materials, fire, and airflow, learned through apprenticeship and experience, not from a textbook. This seemingly simple system was a masterpiece of passive heating. It used readily available biomass fuel, captured heat that would otherwise be wasted, and stored it in the earth and stones, releasing it slowly and comfortably. It transformed the floor from a cold burden into the warmest, most inviting part of the home. It was a testament to human ingenuity, taking basic principles of physics, convection, radiation, thermal mass, and draft, and weaving them into a life-sustaining, comfort-providing architectural marvel. It was the cozy genius of fire below, making warmth bloom above. So you understand the ingenious physics now. Fire below, smoke through channels, stones heat up, warmth radiates above. It's a beautiful, simple system. But a system, no matter how brilliant, doesn't just work on its own. It needs fuel. It needs tending. It needs someone to actually feed that fiery beast beneath your feet. In the traditional Korean home, the hanok, the place where you did this feeding was the agunai, the firebox. Think of it as the dragon's belly, needing a steady supply of tasty combustibles to breathe warm sighs through the gory channels. What did they burn? Well, pretty much whatever was readily available. Wood, of course, was the primary fuel. Different types of wood would burn differently, some fast and hot, others slower and more steadily. But beyond logs, they'd use brushwood, twigs, fallen leaves, anything that could catch fire. Agricultural waste was also a huge source of fuel, especially in farming communities. Rice straw, rice husks, dried stalks, these were plentiful after the harvest and provided a useful, if sometimes smoky, energy source. Imagine collecting all the leftover bits from your garden and using them to heat your house. Talk about zero waste. Your modern compost bin feels a little less impressive now, doesn't it? The daily ritual of firing the Ondol was a fundamental part of life. It wasn't just a chore, it was the process that brought comfort and warmth to the home. Typically, the main firing would happen in the evening, often coinciding with the preparation of the evening meal. Remember how the agunai was often integrated into the kitchen stove? This was the ultimate efficiency hack. You'd light the fire to cook dinner, and the same heat, the same smoke and gases, would be directed under the adjacent living room floor. Kill two birds with one stone, or rather, heat two rooms with one fire. The person responsible, often the woman of the house, would carefully load the agunai with fuel. It wasn't just a matter of shoving everything in and lighting it. It required skill. You needed to know how much fuel to use based on how cold it was outside, how long you wanted the heat to last, and what kind of fuel you were using. A big load of dense hardwood would burn slowly and provide steady, long-lasting heat, perfect for getting the floor warm before bed. A quick fire of straw might give a burst of heat for cooking but wouldn't keep the stones warm for long. It was an intuitive understanding of thermal properties and combustion, learned through doing, generation after generation. Once the fire was lit, you tend it, making sure it burned efficiently and directed the hot gases properly into the gory. You'd watch the smoke coming out of the chimney. A good draft meant the system was working well. If the smoke was sluggish or seemed to be lingering, it might indicate a problem with the draft or a blockage in the channels. It was a constant dialogue with the system, a daily negotiation with fire and air currents. And yes, sometimes that negotiation involved a lot of coughing if the smoke decided it liked the inside of your house better than the outside. The goal wasn't necessarily to keep a fire burning all the time. The genius, remember, was in the thermal mass of the good old stones. You'd build a good fire, get the stones hot, and then let the fire die down. The stones would retain that heat for many hours, slowly releasing it upwards. This meant you could fire the Ondol in the evening, and the floor would remain wonderfully warm throughout the night and often into the next morning. Imagine waking up on a cold winter day, stretching out, and feeling that gentle warmth rising from beneath you. That residual heat was the true magic, carrying you through the coldest hours without needing to constantly feed the flames. It was like having a giant, slow-release heating pad built into your home. Gathering fuel was a significant part of life, especially in rural areas. It wasn't like ordering a truckload of heating oil to be delivered. You had to find it, chop it, dry it, and store it. This was a constant, often arduous task, particularly as populations grew and forests around settlements were depleted. People would travel further to gather firewood or rely heavily on agricultural waste. The scarcity of fuel could be a major challenge, impacting how warm people could keep their homes. It put a very real, tangible limit on comfort. You couldn't just crank up the thermostat. Your warmth was directly tied to the sweat you put into gathering fuel. A mainstream historical fact is that fuel scarcity became a significant environmental and social issue in Korea during the later Joseon dynasty, contributing to deforestation and impacting the lives of ordinary people who relied on biomass for both cooking and heating. This wasn't just about comfort. It was about basic survival and the sustainability of resources. Now for a quirky tidbit. While wood and biomass were standard, sometimes people experimented with other fuels. In some areas, particularly closer to mining regions, low-grade coal or lignite was occasionally used, especially later in the Joseon period and into the 20th century. However, burning coal in an Ondol system designed for wood was much more dangerous. Coal produces higher levels of carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide, and these gases are particularly toxic. Using coal significantly increased the risk of deadly gas leaks if the Goodall stones or clay layers weren't perfectly sealed. So, while it offered a longer, hotter burn, it came with a much higher price tag in terms of safety. It was like upgrading your cozy fireplace to a slightly unstable chemical plant under your floor. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of coal as an Ondol fuel was a primary driver of the decline of traditional Ondol in favor of modern heating, due to the increased health risks, or if the decline was more closely linked to the availability of alternative fuels and the convenience of modern systems during industrialization. Was it the danger that pushed people away, or the ease of a new way? It's a debate etched in the soot of history. The daily firing wasn't just about throwing fuel in. It involved clearing out ash from the agunai and the initial sections of the gory channels. Ash buildup could impede the draft and reduce efficiency. It was a dirty, smoky job, but essential. Imagine having to shovel ash out from under your living room floor every day. Your Roomba would definitely unionize. The temperature of the floor wasn't uniform either. The area closest to the agunai would be the hottest, sometimes incredibly hot, while the areas further away, closer to the chimney, would be cooler. This variation created different zones of warmth within the room. The hottest spot, the agunai side, was often where the most honored guest would sit, or where people would sleep on the coldest nights. The cooler areas might be used for tasks that required less heat, or simply as a place to cool down if the main area got too warm. It wasn't just a heated floor, it was a floor with thermal topography, a landscape of warmth. This daily dance with fire, this constant negotiation with fuel and draft, was the engine that drove the Ondol system. It required effort, skill, and a deep understanding of the natural world and the materials at hand. But the reward was immense. A home transformed from a cold, drafty shelter into a warm, inviting haven, radiating comfort from the ground up. It was the daily ritual that brought the cozy genius of Ondol to life, proving that warmth wasn't just a given, it was earned, tended, and deeply appreciated. So you understand the ingenious physics now. Fire below, smoke through channels, stones heat up, warmth radiates above. It's a beautiful, simple system. But a system, no matter how brilliant, doesn't just work on its own. It needs fuel. It needs tending. It needs someone to actually feed that fiery beast beneath your feet. In the traditional Korean home, the hanok, the place where you did this feeding was the agunai, the firebox. Think of it as the dragon's belly, needing a steady supply of tasty combustibles to breathe warm sighs through the gory channels. What did they burn? Well, pretty much whatever was readily available. Wood, of course, was the primary fuel. Different types of wood would burn differently, some fast and hot, others slower and more steadily. But beyond logs, they'd use brushwood, twigs, fallen leaves, anything that could catch fire. Agricultural waste was also a huge source of fuel, especially in farming communities. Rice straw, rice husks, dried stalks. These were plentiful after the harvest and provided a useful, if sometimes smoky, energy source. Imagine collecting all the leftover bits from your garden and using them to heat your house. Talk about zero waste. Your modern compost bin feels a little less impressive now, doesn't it? The daily ritual of firing the Ondol was a fundamental part of life. It wasn't just a chore, it was the process that brought comfort and warmth to the home. Typically, the main firing would happen in the evening, often coinciding with the preparation of the evening meal. Remember how the agama was often integrated into the kitchen stove? This was the ultimate efficiency hack. You'd light the fire to cook dinner, and the same heat, the same smoke and gases, would be directed under the adjacent living room floor. Kill two birds with one stone, or rather, heat two rooms with one fire. The person responsible, often the woman of the house, would carefully load the agama with fuel. It wasn't just a matter of shoving everything in and lighting it. It required skill. You needed to know how much fuel to use based on how cold it was outside, how long you wanted the heat to last, and what kind of fuel you were using. A big load of dense hardwood would burn slowly and provide steady, long-lasting heat, perfect for getting the floor warm before bed. A quick fire of straw might give a burst of heat for cooking but wouldn't keep the stones warm for long. It was an intuitive understanding of thermal properties and combustion, learned through doing, generation after generation. Once the fire was lit, you tended it, making sure it burned efficiently and directed the hot gases properly into the gory. You'd watch the smoke coming out of the chimney. A good draft meant the system was working well. If the smoke was sluggish or seemed to be lingering, it might indicate a problem with the draft or a blockage in the channels. It was a constant dialogue with the system, a daily negotiation with fire and air currents. And yes, sometimes that negotiation involved a lot of coughing if the smoke decided it liked the inside of your house better than the outside. The goal wasn't necessarily to keep a fire burning all the time. The genius, remember, was in the thermal mass of the good old stones. You'd build a good fire, get the stones hot, and then let the fire die down. The stones would retain that heat for many hours, slowly releasing it upwards. This meant you could fire the Ondol in the evening, and the floor would remain wonderfully warm throughout the night and often into the next morning. Imagine waking up on a cold winter day, stretching out, and feeling that gentle warmth rising from beneath you. That residual heat was the true magic, carrying you through the coldest hours without needing to constantly feed the flames. It was like having a giant, slow-release heating pad built into your home. Gathering fuel was a significant part of life, especially in rural areas. It wasn't like ordering a truckload of heating oil to be delivered. You had to find it, chop it, dry it, and store it. This was a constant, often arduous task, particularly as populations grew and forests around settlements were depleted. People would travel further to gather firewood or rely heavily on agricultural waste. The scarcity of fuel could be a major challenge, impacting how warm people could keep their homes. It put a very real, tangible limit on comfort. You couldn't just crank up the thermostat. Your warmth was directly tied to the sweat you put into gathering fuel. A mainstream historical fact is that fuel scarcity became a significant environmental and social issue in Korea during the later Joseon dynasty, contributing to deforestation and impacting the lives of ordinary people who relied on biomass for both cooking and heating. This wasn't just about comfort. It was about basic survival and the sustainability of resources. Now for a quirky tidbit. While wood and biomass were standard, sometimes people experimented with other fuels. In some areas, particularly closer to mining regions, low-grade coal or lignite was occasionally used, especially later in the Joseon period and into the 20th century. However, burning coal in an Ondol system designed for wood was much more dangerous. Coal produces higher levels of carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide, and these gases are particularly toxic. Using coal significantly increased the risk of deadly gas leaks if the Goodall stones or clay layers weren't perfectly sealed. So, while it offered a longer, hotter burn, it came with a much higher price tag in terms of safety. It was like upgrading your cozy fireplace to a slightly unstable chemical plant under your floor. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of coal as an Ondol fuel was a primary driver of the decline of traditional Ondol in favor of modern heating, due to the increased health risks, or if the decline was more closely linked to the availability of alternative fuels and the convenience of modern systems during industrialization. Was it the danger that pushed people away, or the ease of a new way? It's a debate etched in the soot of history. The daily firing wasn't just about throwing fuel in. It involved clearing out ash from the agungai and the initial sections of the gory channels. Ash buildup could impede the draft and reduce efficiency. It was a dirty, smoky job, but essential. Imagine having to shovel ash out from under your living room floor every day. Your Roomba would definitely unionize. The temperature of the floor wasn't uniform either. The area closest to the agungai would be the hottest, sometimes incredibly hot, while the areas further away, closer to the chimney, would be cooler. This variation created different zones of warmth within the room. The hottest spot, the agungai side, was often where the most honored guest would sit, or where people would sleep on the coldest nights. The cooler areas might be used for tasks that required less heat, or simply as a place to cool down if the main area got too warm. It wasn't just a heated floor, it was a floor with thermal topography, a landscape of warmth. This daily dance with fire, this constant negotiation with fuel and draft, was the engine that drove the Ondol system. It required effort, skill, and a deep understanding of the natural world and the materials at hand. But the reward was immense. A home transformed from a cold, drafty shelter into a warm, inviting haven, radiating comfort from the ground up. It was the daily ritual that brought the cozy genius of Ondol to life, proving that warmth wasn't just a given. It was earned, tended, and deeply appreciated. So you understand the ingenious physics now. Fire below, smoke through channels, stones heat up, warmth radiates above. It's a beautiful, simple system. But a system, no matter how brilliant, doesn't just work on its own. It needs fuel. It needs tending. It needs someone to actually feed that fiery beast beneath your feet. In the traditional Korean home, the hanok, the place where you did this feeding was the agungai, the firebox. Think of it as the dragon's belly, needing a steady supply of tasty combustibles to breathe warm sighs through the gory channels. What did they burn? Well, pretty much whatever was readily available. Wood, of course, was the primary fuel. Different types of wood would burn differently, some fast and hot, others slower and more steadily. But beyond logs, they'd use brushwood, twigs, fallen leaves, anything that could catch fire. Agricultural waste was also a huge source of fuel, especially in farming communities. Rice straw, rice husks, dried stalks, these were plentiful after the harvest and provided a useful, if sometimes smoky, energy source. Imagine collecting all the leftover bits from your garden and using them to heat your house. Talk about zero waste. Your modern compost bin feels a little less impressive now, doesn't it? The daily ritual of firing the Ondol was a fundamental part of life. It wasn't just a chore, it was the process that brought comfort and warmth to the home. Typically, the main firing would happen in the evening, often coinciding with the preparation of the evening meal. Remember how the agungai was often integrated into the kitchen stove? This was the ultimate efficiency hack. You'd light the fire to cook dinner, and the same heat, the same smoke and gases, would be directed under the adjacent living room floor. Kill two birds with one stone, or rather, heat two rooms with one fire. The person responsible, often the woman of the house, would carefully load the agungai with fuel. It wasn't just a matter of shoving everything in and lighting it. It required skill. You needed to know how much fuel to use based on how cold it was outside, how long you wanted the heat to last, and what kind of fuel you were using. A big load of dense hardwood would burn slowly and provide steady, long-lasting heat, perfect for getting the floor warm before bed. A quick fire of straw might give a burst of heat for cooking but wouldn't keep the stones warm for long. It was an intuitive understanding of thermal properties and combustion, learned through doing, generation after generation. Once the fire was lit, you tended it, making sure it burned efficiently and directed the hot gases properly into the gory. You'd watch the smoke coming out of the chimney. A good draft meant the system was working well. If the smoke was sluggish or seemed to be lingering, it might indicate a problem with the draft or a blockage in the channels. It was a constant dialogue with the system, a daily negotiation with fire and air currents. And yes, sometimes that negotiation involved a lot of coughing if the smoke decided it liked the inside of your house better than the outside. The goal wasn't necessarily to keep a fire burning all the time. The genius, remember, was in the thermal mass of the good old stones. You'd build a good fire, get the stones hot, and then let the fire die down. The stones would retain that heat for many hours, slowly releasing it upwards. This meant you could fire the Ondol in the evening, and the floor would remain wonderfully warm throughout the night and often into the next morning. Imagine waking up on a cold winter day, stretching out, and feeling that gentle warmth rising from beneath you. That residual heat was the true magic, carrying you through the coldest hours without needing to constantly feed the flames. It was like having a giant, slow-release heating pad built into your home. Gathering fuel was a significant part of life, especially in rural areas. It wasn't like ordering a truckload of heating oil to be delivered. You had to find it, chop it, dry it, and store it. This was a constant, often arduous task, particularly as populations grew and forests around settlements were depleted. People would travel further to gather firewood or rely heavily on agricultural waste. The scarcity of fuel could be a major challenge, impacting how warm people could keep their homes. It put a very real, tangible limit on comfort. You couldn't just crank up the thermostat. Your warmth was directly tied to the sweat you put into gathering fuel. A mainstream historical fact is that fuel scarcity became a significant environmental and social issue in Korea during the later Joseon dynasty, contributing to deforestation and impacting the lives of ordinary people who relied on biomass for both cooking and heating. This wasn't just about comfort. It was about basic survival and the sustainability of resources. Now for a quirky tidbit. While wood and biomass were standard, sometimes people experimented with other fuels. In some areas, particularly closer to mining regions, low-grade coal or lignite was occasionally used, especially later in the Joseon period and into the 20th century. However, burning coal in an Ondol system designed for wood was much more dangerous. Coal produces higher levels of carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide, and these gases are particularly toxic. Using coal significantly increased the risk of deadly gas leaks if the good stones or clay layers weren't perfectly sealed. So, while it offered a longer, hotter burn, it came with a much higher price tag in terms of safety. It was like upgrading your cozy fireplace to a slightly unstable chemical plant under your floor. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of coal as an Ondol fuel was a primary driver of the decline of traditional Ondol in favor of modern heating, due to the increased health risks, or if the decline was more closely linked to the availability of alternative fuels and the convenience of modern systems during industrialization. Was it the danger that pushed people away, or the ease of a new way? It's a debate etched in the soot of history. The daily firing wasn't just about throwing fuel in. It involved clearing out ash from the agungai and the initial sections of the gory channels. Ash buildup could impede the draft and reduce efficiency. It was a dirty, smoky job, but essential. Imagine having to shovel ash out from under your living room floor every day. Your Roomba would definitely unionize. The temperature of the floor wasn't uniform either. The area closest to the agungai would be the hottest, sometimes incredibly hot, while the areas further away, closer to the chimney, would be cooler. This variation created different zones of warmth within the room. The hottest spot, the agungai side, was often where the most honored guest would sit, or where people would sleep on the coldest nights. The cooler areas might be used for tasks that required less heat, or simply as a place to cool down if the main area got too warm. It wasn't just a heated floor, it was a floor with thermal topography, a landscape of warmth. This daily dance with fire, this constant negotiation with fuel and draft, was the engine that drove the Ondol system. It required effort, skill, and a deep understanding of the natural world and the materials at hand. But the reward was immense. A home transformed from a cold, drafty shelter into a warm, inviting haven, radiating comfort from the ground up. It was the daily ritual that brought the cozy genius of Ondol to life, proving that warmth wasn't just a given, it was earned, tended, and deeply appreciated. So, you've got the system down: fire, smoke, channels, stones, warmth. You understand the daily dedication it took to feed the dragon's belly, to keep that cozy warmth flowing from beneath your feet. But who got to experience this revolutionary comfort? Was it just for the kings and queens, lounging on their heated stone thrones? Or was this a luxury that permeated down to the everyday farmer? Well, one of the truly remarkable things about Ondol, especially by the Josian era, was its incredible adaptability. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all technology, it scaled. It could be found warming the floors of immense palace halls just as effectively as it heated a single room in a humble thatched roof hut. Imagine the scale difference for a moment. On one hand, you have the sprawling complex of Gyeongbokgung Palace in Seoul, with dozens of buildings, elaborate halls, and royal residences. On the other, you have a tiny, one-room dwelling in a rural village. Both, however, could utilize the very same fundamental principle of Ondol heating. The execution, of course, was vastly different. In the grand palaces and temples, the Ondol system was a marvel of ancient engineering on a massive scale. Think of the main audience halls, where the king would meet with his ministers, or the residential quarters of the royal family. These weren't small rooms. Heating them required not just a single agunai, but often multiple fireboxes strategically placed around the building. The gory channels beneath these vast floors were intricate networks, carefully designed to distribute heat evenly across hundreds or even thousands of square feet. The sheer volume of hot gases needed to heat such large areas meant larger agunai, wider gori, and taller, more numerous chimneys to ensure adequate draft. It was like upgrading from a cozy fireplace to a full-blown industrial furnace, all hidden beneath the floorboards. Imagine the army of servants whose job it was just to gather fuel and tend these massive palace furnaces, probably complaining about their aching backs and soot-stained robes. Another wagon of logs for the king's bedroom, Myeon-ho? Didn't we just fill it an hour ago? The materials used in Palace Ondol were often of the highest quality. The Gödel stones would be carefully selected, sometimes transported from distant quarries known for particularly dense, heat-retentive rock. The layers of clay and other materials above the stones were applied with meticulous care by master craftsmen, ensuring a perfectly sealed, durable, and evenly heated surface. The finishing layer of oiled paper might be exceptionally fine, perhaps even layered multiple times for extra insulation and a luxurious feel underfoot. These were systems built to last, designed for maximum comfort and minimal fuss, for the occupants, anyway. The poor folks stoking the fires probably had plenty of fuss. Now contrast that with the humble hut. Here, the Ondol system was scaled down to match the size and resources of the dwelling. Often, only one or two rooms would be heated, typically the main living/sleeping area. The agumai firebox was almost always integrated directly into the kitchen stove, as we discussed. This was the ultimate in efficiency for a small home: cook dinner, heat the house. The gory channels would be simpler, perhaps just a few main paths branching out from the stove before converging at a single chimney, often much shorter and simpler than those on palace roofs. The Gödel stones might be whatever suitable rocks could be found locally, perhaps less uniform in size or shape than those in a palace. The clay layers might be thinner, and the final paper layer perhaps less refined. But the key is, the principle was the same. Fire below, smoke channeled under the floor, stones absorb heat, heat radiates up. Even in the simplest hut, this system provided a level of comfort far beyond what was possible with just an open fire or a brazier. It transformed a cold, potentially damp earth floor into a warm, dry, and inviting living surface. While a palace might have multiple Ondol rooms, a humble home might have just one. But that one room would be the heart of the dwelling in winter, the refuge from the biting cold. It was the equalizer. Even the poorest family could, with effort, create a warm spot in their home. This widespread adoption across social strata is a significant aspect of Ondol's story. It wasn't just a technology for the elite, like Roman hypocausts sometimes were. It became the standard heating method for everyone in Korea, reflecting a cultural emphasis on the importance of a warm home, regardless of wealth. Of course, a king's Ondol was undoubtedly more consistent, longer lasting, and probably less smoky than a farmer's, but the fundamental experience of radiant floor heat was shared. A mainstream historical fact is that the Joseon dynasty, while rigidly structured in terms of social hierarchy, saw Ondol become ubiquitous across all levels of society, from the royal court to the common people. This widespread adoption is evident in the archaeological remains and historical records of traditional Korean houses, ****, from this period. Now for a quirky tidbit. In some very small or temporary structures, a simplified form of Ondol might be used, sometimes called gujeol or gure, depending on the specific type and region. This could involve just a few basic trenches under a sleeping area, heated by a small fire nearby, effectively a throwback to the more rudimentary systems of earlier eras, but adapted for modern, Joseon era, use where a full Ondol system wasn't feasible or necessary. It shows the core idea was so powerful it could be stripped down to its bare essentials and still provide some benefit. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of Ondol in commoner homes was primarily a top-down influence from elite architecture or if the basic principles were independently developed or spread among the populace, and then later refined and adopted on a grander scale by the aristocracy. Was it the peasants copying the palace, or the palace refining a peasant innovation? It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation in the history of heating. The adaptability of Ondol also extended to different types of buildings. While most commonly associated with residential homes, it was also used in schools, government buildings, and even some Buddhist temples, particularly in the monks' living quarters where a warm floor for meditation and sleeping was highly valued. The scale and complexity would vary depending on the building's purpose and size, but the underlying system remained constant. Imagine the contrast again. In a grand palace hall, the floor is so warm you could comfortably nap on it during a royal decree. In a small hut, the warm spot near the stove is where the family gathers to share their meager meal, the heat radiating up through the paper floor a tangible source of comfort against the biting winter air. The experience is different in scale and luxury, but the essential feeling, the deep, pervasive warmth rising from the ground, is the same. This ability to scale, to be adapted for both immense, elaborate structures and simple, functional dwellings, is a key reason why Ondol became so deeply ingrained in Korean life. It wasn't an exclusive technology. It was a fundamental part of building that could be applied wherever warmth was needed. It speaks to the elegance and robustness of the design principle itself, a simple idea refined over millennia into a system that could serve everyone, proving that cozy genius doesn't always require complex machinery or expensive materials. Sometimes, it just requires understanding how to make fire and earth work together. Okay, so we've painted a pretty picture of cozy nights, warm floors, and families gathered in a haven of heat radiating from the earth. And yes, Ondol was undeniably a stroke of genius, providing comfort that was revolutionary for its time. But let's be real for a moment. This was ancient technology dealing with fire, smoke, and toxic gases, all happening right beneath where you lived and slept. It wasn't all glowing stones and sweet dreams. Traditional Ondol, while brilliant, came with significant challenges and dangers that were a constant part of life. Imagine living with something akin to a slow-burning bonfire perpetually smoldering under your living room floor. While the system was designed to channel smoke away through flues and a chimney, it wasn't always perfect. Leaks happened. Cracks developed in the clay or the good old stones. The paper floor could tear. And when that happened, smoke and soot could find their way into the living space. You weren't just dealing with a bit of campfire smell. You were dealing with irritating smoke filling the air, stinging your eyes, and coating everything in a fine layer of soot. Imagine constantly wiping down surfaces, dealing with smoky clothes, and trying to breathe easily in your own home. It definitely adds a layer of gritty reality to the cozy image. It wasn't exactly the air purification system you'd find in a modern smart home. Beyond the sheer unpleasantness of smoke and soot, there was a far more insidious and deadly danger: carbon monoxide poisoning. Traditional Ondol systems burned organic matter, wood, straw, biomass, and later, sometimes coal. The incomplete combustion of these fuels, especially in enclosed or poorly ventilated spaces, produces carbon monoxide, CO, a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas that is highly toxic. The gory channels acted as horizontal chimneys carrying this gas. If the system wasn't perfectly sealed, if there were cracks in the Goodall stones, gaps between them, or breaks in the layers of clay and paper above, that deadly gas could seep up into the living room. Think about it. You're sleeping soundly on your warm floor, breathing in air that might be slowly filling with CO. Early symptoms of CO poisoning, headache, dizziness, nausea, fatigue, could easily be mistaken for a cold or just feeling unwell. In fact, people might not even realize they were being poisoned until it was too late. Carbon monoxide displaces oxygen in your blood, literally suffocating you from the inside. It was a silent killer lurking beneath the warm floor. Stories and historical records contain accounts of entire families being found dead in their homes, victims of faulty or leaking Ondol systems. This wasn't a rare occurrence. It was a known, terrifying risk associated with the technology. It was the dark side of the cozy coin. Maintaining an Ondol system wasn't a set-it-and-forget-it situation. It required constant vigilance and upkeep. The Agumai needed regular clearing of ash and debris to ensure proper airflow and combustion. The gory channels could accumulate soot over time, reducing efficiency and potentially causing blockages that could lead to smoke backflow or leaks. Imagine having to periodically clean out narrow, soot-filled tunnels under your floor. Not exactly a fun weekend project. The Goodall stones themselves could crack or shift over time, especially with repeated heating and cooling cycles. The layers of clay and paper above the stones needed patching and repair whenever they showed signs of wear or damage. A tiny tear in the paper floor wasn't just an aesthetic issue, it was a potential entry point for deadly gas. It required a level of constant, physical maintenance that modern heating systems simply don't demand. Your yearly furnace checkup seems like a breeze compared to this. There was also the risk of fire, though perhaps less direct than an open hearth in the middle of a room. The intense heat from the gory channels could dry out surrounding earth and timber structures. While the Goodall stones and clay layers provided a barrier, poorly constructed or maintained systems could allow excessive heat to reach combustible materials. In homes with thatched roofs, a stray spark from the chimney or a fire that got out of control in the Agumai could be catastrophic. Entire villages could be wiped out by fire, and heating systems were sometimes the culprit. Fuel scarcity, as we touched on, wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a challenge that directly impacted health and survival. Without enough fuel, you couldn't keep the floor warm. A cold, damp home in winter is a breeding ground for illness, particularly respiratory problems. The choice between staying warm and having enough food to eat or fuel to burn was a very real one for many families. Using less than ideal fuels, like damp wood or certain types of agricultural waste, could also increase smoke and soot production, exacerbating indoor air quality issues. And the shift to coal, while offering longer burns, brought the heightened risk of CO poisoning. A mainstream historical fact is that carbon monoxide poisoning from traditional Ondol systems was a significant cause of accidental death in Korea, particularly during the colder months, well into the 20th century before modern heating became widespread. This highlights the inherent danger despite the system's ingenuity and comfort. Now for a quirky tidbit. To test for smoke leaks in the Ondol floor, people would sometimes use incense or smoke-producing materials in the Agumai and then look for wisps of smoke rising from the floor surface inside the room. Finding a leak meant immediate repair was needed. Imagine your house smelling like a temple every time you checked for deadly gas. Historians still argue whether the dangers of traditional Ondol, particularly the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning, were a major factor driving the adoption of modern heating systems in the 20th century, or if the convenience, cleanliness, and efficiency of new technologies like oil boilers and electric heating were the primary motivators. Was the fear of dying in your sleep the main reason for change, or just the appeal of not having to shovel coal and deal with soot? It's a debate etched in the statistics of mortality and the economics of modernization. Living with traditional Ondol required a constant balance between enjoying its unparalleled comfort and managing its inherent risks. It demanded careful construction, diligent maintenance, and an awareness of the dangers lurking beneath the surface. It was a system born of necessity and refined for comfort, but it never completely shed its origins rooted in fire and smoke. The warmth it provided was deeply appreciated, perhaps even more so because it was earned through effort and vigilance, a daily reminder that even the coziest genius comes with its own set of challenges. So, you've navigated the smoky, sometimes perilous world of traditional Ondol, understanding the daily grind of feeding the agungai and keeping a wary eye out for deadly gas leaks. For centuries, this was the standard, the bedrock of Korean domestic comfort. But time, as it always does, kept marching on. The world outside the cozy hammock walls was changing rapidly, especially as Korea moved into the late 19th and 20th centuries. Modernization, industrialization, urbanization, these forces were reshaping society at a dizzying pace, and they inevitably came knocking on the door of the traditional home, bringing with them new ideas about how to live, and crucially, how to stay warm. The decline of the traditional wood-fired Ondol wasn't sudden. It was a gradual process, a slow fading of the fires as new forms of heat emerged. Think of it like the transition from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles. For a while, they coexisted, but the advantages of the new technology eventually became undeniable. The challenges of traditional Ondol, which we just talked about, the sheer labor involved in gathering fuel and tending the fire, the constant battle against soot and ash, the terrifying risk of carbon monoxide poisoning, and the increasing scarcity and cost of firewood, started to outweigh the cozy comfort it provided, especially for people living in rapidly developing urban areas. Imagine trying to maintain a traditional wood-fired Ondol system in a multi-story apartment building in a bustling city. Where do you store the massive piles of firewood? How do you manage the smoke and ash in close proximity to your neighbors? The system, so perfectly suited to the rural hammock with its open spaces and integrated kitchen stove, became increasingly impractical in the new urban landscape. As people migrated from the countryside to the city seeking work and opportunity, they left behind not just their fields, but also the lifestyle that supported traditional Ondol. New forms of fuel started to become more readily available and, in some contexts, more convenient. Coal, which had been used cautiously and sporadically in traditional Ondol due to its toxicity, became more common, particularly in the form of yontan, compressed coal briquettes. These offered a longer, more consistent burn than wood and were easier to transport and store in urban settings. For a time, yontan-fired Ondol became a common sight, often involving modifying the agungai to burn the briquettes more efficiently. However, this also dramatically increased the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. Burning coal produces far more CO than burning wood, and the older Ondol systems weren't always equipped to safely handle the higher volume and concentration of toxic gases. So, while it offered convenience, this transition phase was arguably even more dangerous than the wood-fired era. It was like swapping one dragon for a more toxic, smoke-breathing one. Then came the truly modern heating technologies. In the post-Korean War era, particularly from the 1960s onwards, South Korea experienced rapid economic growth and modernization. Western-style buildings, including apartment complexes and office buildings, became common. These structures were designed with different heating systems in mind. Radiators, heated by central boilers burning oil or gas, became popular. Forced air heating systems, blowing warm air through ducts, also appeared. These systems offered a level of convenience and cleanliness that traditional Ondol simply couldn't match. You didn't need to gather fuel, tend a fire, or shovel ash. You just turned a dial or flipped a switch. It was like magic compared to the daily labor of firing the agungai. The convenience factor was huge. Imagine being able to heat your entire home evenly with minimal effort, without the constant worry of smoke leaks or CO poisoning. Though modern systems have their own risks, of course, they are generally considered safer when properly installed and maintained. For a society focused on rapid progress and industrial efficiency, the labor-intensive, somewhat unpredictable nature of traditional Ondol seemed increasingly outdated. Why spend hours chopping wood and tending a fire when you could have instant, clean heat at the flick of a switch? Your inner lazy teenager probably cheered at the thought. As new homes and buildings were constructed, they were overwhelmingly built with these modern heating systems. Traditional Hanek with full Ondol systems became less common, or the Ondol was replaced or supplemented with modern heating during renovations. Rural areas held on to traditional Ondol longer, where fuel was more readily available and the lifestyle was less impacted by urban pressures. But even there, the appeal of convenience and safety eventually led many families to switch to coal briquettes, and later, to oil or gas boilers with radiators or modern underfloor heating. A mainstream historical fact, the rapid economic development of South Korea in the mid to late 20th century, often referred to as the miracle on the Han River, was a primary catalyst for the widespread adoption of Western-style infrastructure, including modern heating systems, leading to the significant decline of traditional Ondol as the dominant heating method. Now for a quirky tidbit. During the transition period, it wasn't uncommon to find homes that had both a traditional Ondol system, often only in one room, and a modern heating system like radiators. People would use the Ondol for its unique radiant warmth in the main living area and the modern system for heating other parts of the house or for quick warmth when the Ondol wasn't fired up. It was a fascinating hybrid approach, trying to get the best of both worlds. Historians still argue whether the decline of traditional Ondol was primarily driven by the inherent dangers and labor, or by the irresistible convenience and perceived modernity of new technologies. Was it pushed out by its flaws, or pulled away by the allure of the new? It's a debate etched in the changing building codes and energy consumption patterns of a nation. The fading of the wood-fired Ondol wasn't just about technology. It was also about a changing lifestyle. As homes got bigger and layouts changed, the traditional floor-based living style that Ondol fostered began to shift. Furniture became more common, and the need for the entire floor to be the primary heated surface lessened in some homes. The cultural centrality of the warm floor started to diminish as people adopted new ways of using their living spaces. By the late 20th century, traditional wood or biomass-fired Ondol had largely disappeared from urban centers and was becoming less common even in rural areas. It became something associated with older homes, traditional villages, or a nostalgic past. The dragon's belly was fed less and less often, its fiery breath replaced by the hum of a boiler or the click of a thermostat. The cozy genius of ancient Ondol seemed destined to become just another chapter in history, a relic of a time when warmth was earned through fire and stone. But as we'll see, the story doesn't quite end there. The core idea, the fundamental brilliance of heating the floor, was too good to simply vanish. So, the fires in the traditional Agunlai were fading, the daily ritual of feeding the dragon's belly becoming less common as the world modernized and the challenges of soot, labor, and deadly gas became harder to ignore. It seemed like the cozy genius of ancient Ondol might be relegated to museums and historical villages, a fascinating but obsolete footnote in the history of heating. But here's the thing, the idea of heating the floor, of having that deep, pervasive warmth rise from beneath you, had become so deeply ingrained in the Korean psyche, so fundamental to the concept of a comfortable home, that it simply refused to die. It didn't disappear, it adapted. It was reborn. Imagine the engineers and builders of the 20th century looking at the old Ondol system. They saw the problems, the inefficiency of burning raw biomass, the pollution, the danger of smoke leaks and carbon monoxide. But they also saw the undeniable comfort, the efficiency of using thermal mass, and the cultural preference for radiant floor heat. They thought, okay, how can we get that feeling, that warm floor, but make it clean, safe, and convenient using modern technology? The answer was to replace the fire and smoke with something else, something controllable and non-toxic: hot water. The core principle remained the same: circulate a heat source beneath the floor to warm a thermal mass, which then radiates heat into the room. But the execution changed completely. The fiery Agunlai was replaced by a modern boiler, typically fueled by oil or gas, and later electricity, or even geothermal energy. This boiler heats water. The smoky gory channels were replaced by a network of durable pipes, usually made of copper or plastic, laid out in a grid or spiral pattern across the subfloor. The Gödel stones, the ancient thermal battery, were replaced by a layer of concrete or cement screed poured over the pipes. And the finishing layers of clay and paper were replaced by modern flooring materials: wood, tile, laminate, or even carpet, though tile is particularly good for conducting heat. So, you turn on your boiler. Hot water flows through the pipes embedded in the concrete screed. The heat from the water transfers to the concrete. The concrete, like the old good old stones, acts as a thermal mass, absorbing and storing the heat. Then, it radiates that heat upwards through the floor finish into the room. The loop is complete: heat source, boiler, circulation medium, hot water, channels, pipes, thermal mass, concrete, radiant surface, floor. It's the same genius principle, just translated into the language of 20th and 21st century engineering. It's like swapping your trusty old horse-drawn carriage for a Tesla. The destination is the same, but the ride is a lot smoother, cleaner, and involves significantly fewer piles of manure. This modern form of Ondol, often called Ondol or boiler, a Koreanized pronunciation of boiler, heating, quickly became the standard heating system in South Korea, especially with the boom in apartment building construction from the mid-20th century onwards. It offered all the advantages of traditional Ondol's radiant heat, that comfortable, even warmth that heats objects and people directly, without the drawbacks of smoke, soot, and the constant need to tend a fire. You just set a thermostat, and the boiler kicks in, circulating hot water as needed. It was the cozy warmth Koreans were accustomed to, delivered with modern convenience and safety. Why did floor heating remain so dominant in Korea when other countries largely adopted radiators or forced air? Several factors played a role. The strong cultural preference for floor-based living, fostered by centuries of traditional Ondol, meant that a warm floor was not just a heating method, but an integral part of the home's function. Sitting and sleeping on the floor is simply much more comfortable when the floor is warm. Also, radiant heat from the floor is often considered more energy efficient than heating the air directly, as heat rises and warm air tends to stratify, collect near the ceiling. Heating the thermal mass of the floor creates a more even temperature gradient from floor to ceiling. Plus, for people used to the deep, penetrating warmth of traditional Ondol, the dry, sometimes drafty heat of forced air systems, or the localized heat of radiators just didn't feel the same. It lacked that specific kind of cozy. Imagine someone who grew up with a warm, cuddly blanket being offered a thin sheet. It just doesn't hit the same. Modern Ondol systems are incredibly common in Korea today. Walk into almost any apartment or house, and you'll likely find a control panel for the boiler and a floor that, when the heating is on, is comfortably warm to the touch. The pipes are usually laid out before the concrete slab is poured during construction, making it a fundamental part of the building's structure, just like the gory channels were in traditional Hanok. A mainstream historical fact is that modern hydronic, hot water, floor heating systems became the dominant method of residential heating in South Korea during the latter half of the 20th century, and remains so today, largely supplanting traditional Ondol fueled by biomass, or coal briquettes. Now for a quirky tidbit. While most modern systems use hot water, some newer systems, particularly for smaller areas or renovations, use electric heating cables or mats embedded directly under the flooring. These offer quick heat but lack the significant thermal mass of the concrete screed, meaning they don't retain heat as long after the power is off, giving a slightly different quality of warmth compared to traditional or hydronic Ondol. It's like getting a quick zap of warmth versus the slow, steady embrace of a warm rock. Historians still argue whether the seamless transition from traditional Ondol to modern hydronic floor heating was primarily driven by the existing cultural preference for floor warmth, or by the inherent energy efficiency benefits of radiant systems that happened to align with that preference. Was it culture pushing technology, or technology enabling a preferred culture? It's a debate felt underfoot. The evolution didn't stop there. Modern systems have thermostats, timers, and zone controls, allowing you to heat different rooms to different temperatures or set schedules, something unimaginable with a traditional Agunai. They are clean, require minimal daily effort, and are significantly safer in terms of air quality and carbon monoxide risk, though boiler maintenance is still important. You no longer have to worry about shoveling ash or checking for deadly gas leaks under your floor every night. Your feet are safe, your lungs are clear, and your back isn't aching from hauling firewood. A definite upgrade, even if you miss the rustic charm and potential fiery doom of the old ways. While the feel of modern Ondol is incredibly similar to traditional Ondol in terms of radiant warmth, some purists argue that it's not quite the same. They might say the heat from a concrete slab heated by water pipes lacks the subtle variations and the deep, penetrating quality of heat from massive stones heated by direct fire and smoke. They might miss the distinct zones of warmth, the hottest spot near the agunai, which is harder to replicate perfectly with evenly spaced pipes. It's like comparing the taste of food cooked over a wood fire to food cooked on a gas stove. Both are heated, but the subtle nuances are different. Despite these subtle differences, modern Ondol successfully captured the essence of its ancient predecessor. It kept the floor as the primary source of heat, maintaining the comfort and lifestyle associated with it. It proved that the cozy genius of heating the ground wasn't just a survival strategy for ancient times, but a fundamentally sound and highly desirable way to heat a home, adaptable to the demands and technologies of the modern world. The dragon's belly may now be a sleek metal box in your utility room, and its fiery breath hot water instead of smoke, but the warmth rising from your floor is a direct descendant of those very first attempts to make the cold earth warm. So, you've seen how the ingenious core idea of heating the floor, born from necessity and refined over millennia in Korea, didn't die out with the advent of modernity. It simply shed its smoky skin and was reborn as the clean, convenient hydronic floor heating system that keeps millions of Korean homes cozy today. It's a testament to the enduring power of a good idea, especially when that idea involves being wonderfully warm in winter. But this raises a fascinating question. Was this cozy genius confined only to the Korean peninsula? Did the idea of heating the ground beneath you pop up elsewhere, either independently or through some ancient form of technological exchange? Did Korea's Ondol system influence other cultures, or were there parallel innovations happening across Eurasia? Let's cast our gaze a little wider and see if we can find any echoes of that warm floor philosophy beyond Korea's borders. The most immediate parallel, and one that historians often discuss alongside Ondol, is the Kang system found in northern China and parts of Manchuria. Like Ondol, the Kang uses heat and smoke from a fire to warm a raised platform made of brick or earth. Often, this platform is connected to a stove used for cooking, much like the agunai and kitchen integration in Korean hanok. You'd light a fire in the stove, cook your meal, and the hot smoke and gases would flow through channels underneath the heated platform before exiting through a chimney. People would then sit and sleep on this warm platform. Sounds pretty similar, right? However, there are key differences. While Ondol typically heats the entire floor of a room or multiple rooms, the Kang is usually a specific, raised platform within a room, designed primarily for sitting and sleeping. It's more like a heated bed or bench than a heated floor covering the entire living area. The flue systems under a Kang are often simpler than the complex networks of gory channels found in a well-built Ondol. And while both systems use thermal mass, brick or earth for Kang, stones for Ondol, the scale and extent of the heated area are generally different. Think of it as the difference between a heated mattress pad and full underfloor heating for your entire house. Both are warm, but one covers significantly more ground. Historians still argue whether the Kang and Ondol systems developed entirely independently in response to similar cold climates and available materials, or if there was some form of cultural exchange and mutual influence between the regions over centuries. Given the close proximity and long history of interaction between the Korean peninsula and northern China, it seems plausible that ideas about using fire to heat the ground might have passed back and forth, evolving differently in each context based on local architecture, materials, and lifestyle preferences. Perhaps someone from Goguryeo saw a rudimentary Kang and thought, "Hey, what if we did that for the whole floor?" Or maybe someone in China saw Korean Ondol and thought, "That's great, but I just need a warm spot to sleep, let's simplify it." It's a fascinating puzzle of ancient technological diffusion. Beyond the Kang, you can find hints of similar ideas in other cold regions. Primitive forms of heating the ground near a fire pit, as we discussed way back at the beginning, seem to be a pretty universal human innovation born of necessity. Some indigenous cultures in Siberia or North America, for example, used heated stones in sweat lodges or placed warm rocks in their dwellings for radiant heat, though these were generally not integrated, channeled systems like Ondol or calm. It was more about bringing hot objects into the space, rather than building the heating system into the structure itself. Then there's the granddaddy of ancient underfloor heating systems, the Roman hypocaust. Now, the Roman hypocaust was a much more complex and different beast than Ondol. It was primarily used in public baths and the villas of the wealthy, not standard homes. It involved creating a raised floor, suspended on pillars called pili, and circulating hot air and smoke, generated by a furnace, *prefernium*, through the void space beneath the floor and sometimes up through channels in the walls. This heated the floor and walls, which then radiated warmth into the room. The Roman hypocaust was impressive in its scale and engineering, but it was also more complex and resource-intensive to build and operate than Ondol. It required raising the entire floor structure, building intricate pillar systems, and managing the flow of hot air through larger voids. It was also designed for a different purpose, heating large, often humid spaces like baths, or providing luxurious warmth in elite homes. Ondol, on the other hand, evolved as a practical, integrated heating system for everyday dwellings across society, focusing on heating the living floor directly with thermal mass. And while both used heat and flow under the floor, the Roman system circulated hot air/smoke in a large void, while Ondol channeled hot smoke/gases through narrower flues directly beneath a stone layer. It's like comparing a central air heating system to a network of heated pipes under your floor. Same goal, very different execution. A mainstream historical fact is that the Roman hypocaust system, developed in the Roman Empire, is one of the most well-known examples of ancient underfloor heating outside of East Asia, demonstrating that the concept of heating from below was explored by different advanced civilizations facing the need for interior warmth. Now for a quirky tidbit. While the Roman hypocaust was primarily a feature of public baths and elite homes, there's some archaeological evidence suggesting simpler, less elaborate versions might have been used in more modest Roman buildings or military structures, perhaps just heating a small section of floor or a bench, hinting at a broader, if less sophisticated, application of the underlying principle. It seems the desire for a warm backside is a universal human trait. Historians still argue whether there was any direct or indirect knowledge transfer or influence between the Roman hypocaust systems and the development of underfloor heating in East Asia, or if these were entirely independent inventions. The vast geographical distance and lack of clear historical records make it difficult to establish a definitive link, leaving open the possibility that similar problems, cold winters, simply led to similar, albeit distinct, solutions, heating the floor. It's a question of parallel evolution versus ancient globalization. Looking at these different systems, you see a common thread, the fundamental human desire to be warm, especially on the surface you interact with most, the floor. Different cultures, facing similar environmental pressures, arrived at solutions that, while varying in their specifics and sophistication, shared the core idea of making the ground a source of heat rather than a drain of warmth. Ondol stands out for its elegance, its integration into the very structure of the home, its efficiency in using thermal mass, and its widespread adoption across all levels of society. It wasn't just a luxury. It was a fundamental part of the Korean way of life, a cozy genius that resonated deeply with the practical needs and cultural preferences of the people. Its echoes can be seen in parallel systems like the Kong, and its underlying principle shares a distant kinship with systems like the Roman hypocaust, but its specific form and cultural significance remain uniquely Korean. It's proof that sometimes, the simplest sounding idea, heating the floor, can be the most revolutionary, leading to millennia of refinement and a legacy of enduring comfort that, as we saw, continues to warm homes today. So, we've traveled from the smoky pits of prehistory, through the refined flues of ancient kingdoms, across dynasties, and into the modern era, seeing how the simple, brilliant idea of heating the floor evolved and persisted. We've even peeked at potential cousins or distant relatives of Ondol in other parts of the world. But what is the lasting legacy of this cozy genius? What does Ondol mean to Korea today, and what might its future hold? Even though most Koreans now live in apartments and houses heated by modern hydronic systems, the spirit of Ondol is still very much alive. That preference for floor heating, that deep-seated comfort derived from a warm surface underfoot, is a direct inheritance from millennia of living with traditional Ondol. It's more than just a practical heating method, it's woven into the fabric of Korean identity and culture. Think about the hanok, the traditional Korean house, which was so profoundly shaped by the Ondol system. The layout, the low furniture, the custom of sitting and sleeping on the floor, all these aspects of traditional life are intrinsically linked to the warm floor. While fewer people live in traditional hanok full-time today, these buildings are cherished as cultural treasures, preserved in historical villages or adapted for modern use as guest houses, cafes, or cultural centers. And when you visit one, especially in winter, experiencing the warmth of a traditional Ondol floor is often highlighted as a key part of the experience, a tangible connection to the past. It feels like stepping back in time, but with really happy feet. The cultural significance goes deeper than architecture. Ondol fostered a unique kind of domestic intimacy. Families gathered closely on the warm floor, sharing meals and conversation. It encouraged physical closeness and a communal living style centered around the shared warmth. This sense of togetherness, of the floor as a gathering place, still resonates in Korean culture. Even in modern homes with floor heating, it's common for families to sit on cushions on the floor in the warmest room, especially in winter. The practice of sleeping on thick quilts, laid directly on the floor is also still common, particularly in the main bedroom, taking full advantage of that radiant warmth throughout the night. It's a legacy etched not just in stone and clay, but in the way people interact and find comfort in their homes. Ondol has also left its mark on the Korean language and proverbs, reflecting its deep integration into daily life and thought. Phrases like batam, literally, stomach ache, but also used to describe a cold or illness often attributed to sleeping on a cold floor, highlight the importance of the warm surface for health and well-being. The idea that a warm floor is essential for health is a direct legacy of traditional Ondol, where damp, cold floors could indeed contribute to illness. There are countless sayings and anecdotes about the warmth of the Ondol floor, portraying it as the ultimate symbol of home, comfort, and security. It's the kind of warmth that feels like a hug from the house itself. A mainstream historical fact is that the cultural practice of sitting, eating, and sleeping directly on the floor in Korea is a direct result of the widespread adoption and refinement of the Ondol heating system over centuries, fundamentally shaping domestic life and architecture. Now for a quirky tidbit. In some modern Korean homes, even those with full floor heating, people might still use small electric heated mats or cushions for extra localized warmth while sitting at a desk or watching TV. It's like a micro-Ondol, a miniature callback to the ancient desire for a perfectly warm spot, even when the whole floor is already heated. Your ancestors would probably shake their heads and say, "You heat the whole floor, but you need a tiny mat?" Kids these days. Historians still argue whether the persistence of floor-based living in Korea is solely due to the legacy of Ondol, or if there were other cultural or environmental factors that also contributed to this preference, with Ondol simply being the ideal technology to support it. Was the warm floor the cause of the lifestyle, or the perfect partner for it? It's a debate that makes you want to sit on a warm floor and think it over. Looking to the future, the principles behind Ondol might even offer insights for sustainable heating. Modern hydronic floor heating, while using fossil fuels, often gas or oil, for the boiler, is generally considered more energy efficient than forced air systems because radiant heat requires less energy to achieve a comfortable temperature and reduces heat stratification. The thermal mass of the concrete floor stores heat, allowing the boiler to cycle less frequently. As the world looks for greener ways to heat homes, the core idea of heating a thermal mass under the floor with a renewable heat source, like geothermal or solar-heated water, becomes incredibly relevant. The ancient wisdom of Ondol, born from burning biomass, could find a new life powered by clean energy, proving that sometimes the oldest ideas are the most forward-thinking. Imagine a smart home system using AI to predict the optimal time to heat your floor using renewable energy, based on ancient principles. Your great-great-great-grandmother would be astounded. Ondol's legacy is more than just a heating system, it's a philosophy of comfort, a connection to the earth, and a symbol of home. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound innovations come from observing the simplest principles of physics and adapting them to meet basic human needs. From a smoky pit house to a sleek modern apartment, the journey of Ondol is a story of resilience, ingenuity, and the enduring human desire for a warm, cozy place to call home. It transformed the cold ground from an obstacle into an embrace, leaving a legacy of warmth that continues to comfort and define Korean life today. As we reach the end of our journey tonight, the echoes of ancient fires begin to soften, the sounds of crackling wood and whispering smoke fading gently into the quiet hum of modern life. You can feel the deep, steady warmth that has been the focus of our exploration, a warmth that has comforted generations, a warmth that connects the present to a distant, ingenious past. The floor beneath you, whether heated by ancient flues or modern pipes, holds within it the story of survival, adaptation, and the enduring human quest for a place of peace and comfort. The chill of the outside world seems far away now, replaced by a profound sense of safety and stillness. Allow yourself to sink into this warmth, letting go of any lingering thoughts or worries, feeling the gentle heat rise and envelop you like a soft blanket woven from history and ingenuity. Let the images of smoky hearths and warm stone floors drift away, leaving behind only the simple, comforting sensation of warmth radiating from the earth beneath you. Your journey through the history of Ondol is complete. The cozy genius has done its work. All that is left is to rest.